Good morning, everyone. I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about privacy and data science. My research area is in computer security and privacy. So this is something that I care a lot about. And I wanted to expose you all to some of the privacy issues that may come up as you use and work with data in your career to come. So maybe let's start things off by let me ask all of you a question. Why should I care about privacy? There was a chief technical officer for Sun who said, privacy is dead, get over it. Any reasons you could think of, feel free to type in the chat, why privacy might matter. Legal issues, identity theft. Yeah, I don't want people to steal money from me, sign up for a credit card in my name. Safety. Yeah, safety. There are some folks for whom it's very important. For instance, if you've had an abusive ex, then you'd really maybe like them to not know where you live so they can't come to your house and stalk you. But maybe, for broader variety of folks, it's rather not have your home address on your public Facebook page. Personal safety, yep. Computers are taking over the world and we'd like to retain some sense of control or autonomy, space for ourselves. Yeah, autonomy in your life. Ethics. Have a right to your own information. Control over your own information. It's yours. You get to say. Disclose to whom you want, not to what someone else wants. Kind of a basic human right. Okay, that's an interesting notion. There's a French philosopher who points out that in prisons, it's very common to have an architecture of surveillance, and that influences how people think and live when they know they're being watched. We are, in some sense, animals, and we haven't lost that a piece of that prey thing. And when there's the feeling of being watched, that can be a little bit scary. Being a decent person. Public should not know what you're doing in private. Doxing. Oh, yeah, that's a big deal. Maybe I might like to participate in online conversations. But then if I say something unpopular, are opponents, my political opponents, going to dox me? Are they going to release information about my home address and my phone number and the names of my daughters and kids and encourage others to give me, annoying, threatening calls in the middle of the night? And sex workers online. Yep. Safety. So people are humanized. So we're not just numbers. Okay. Marginalized groups, especially at risk. Okay, great. Those sound like good reasons. So I thought what I would maybe do to add to that is to show you a couple of incidents of privacy failures in the past that I think are instructive, talk you through some ways of conceptualizing privacy, and then jump into a notebook and we'll do a case study. So I think you all know who this is. This is Mark Zuckerberg at a hearing, a congressional hearing in 2018. Does anyone, he's been in Congress, called before Congress so many times, but does anyone remember what it was back in 2018 that got him there? Some of you do. Cambridge Analytica. Cambridge Analytica. What was the deal with Cambridge Analytica? The election, 2016 election. Yeah, data breach. Yeah, it's a fascinating story that maybe many of you have heard, but maybe some of you haven't. The story was in the news, came out to the news that a whistleblower came forward and said, this British company called Cambridge Analytica has gathered data, personal data from the Facebook profiles of 50 million Americans. And they were advertising that they could go help election campaigns target voters and try to influence them and get them to vote with targeted advertising. And I guess the Trump campaign had hired them at one point. It's not clear whether they actually used this data or whether it was effective, but combination of data leaked on 50 million Americans and a political campaign really got Facebook in the news, because these were people who were saying, this company, the WHO, has access to my data. I've never heard of Cambridge Analytica. Why do they have my data? All right. Does anyone know how Cambridge Analytica gathered data on 50 million Americans' Facebook profiles? You say Cambridge Analytica is collecting data, but how does that work? Did they like call you up on the phone and they say, could you give me your data? And you're like, sure, here it is. Surveys? You're kind of on the right track there. You think they put up a survey on Facebook and then waited for Facebook people to respond, to ask the people on Facebook, hey, what's your phone number? What's your birthday? Personality quizzes. Yeah. I see a bunch of you know. Personality quizzes. So they had a Facebook app that they advertised as like, just learn about your personality. And you could install this app and answer the questions on the quiz. And if you did that, then their app would say, oh, you're such and such personality. But it would also record information about you. Facebook apps can access, well, at the time, they could access anything that you could access on Facebook. So the app was silently accessing people's profiles of those who had installed it, and not just telling them what kind of personality they are, but downloading their information to Cambridge Analytica servers. But that wouldn't be that big a deal, because they got something like 50,000 people to install the app and take their personality quiz. So no big deal. But it was like 50 million people whose data was actually accessed by Cambridge Analytica. So how did that work? Turns out, here's the second feature of how Facebook apps worked at the time. Facebook was thinking, well, you're going to install an app to help you do something. So anything you can view on Facebook, if you authorize the app should be able to do or see too. You can see your friends' profiles. So that meant that if I install the app, if I take this personality quiz and install this app, then the app not only can see my personal data, but it can see the personal data of all my friends, all my Facebook friends. Because I can see the data of my Facebook friends. And so Facebook decided, well, my app should be able to too. So when I thought I was taking a personality quiz, it was not only downloading my data without telling me, but it was actually downloading all the data of all my friends. And so that's how this obscure British company actually started, with this one professor who was doing this to try to gather marketing data, collected data on 50 million people. And then they claimed they were going to use this to go help election campaigns win the election. And the Trump campaign supposedly hired them. Actually, it wasn't just Trump. The Obama campaign had also gathered data, from what I read, on something like 100 million Americans. It's not clear how effective any of this data was, but this got Mark Zuckerberg in Congress because Americans all over said, I didn't agree to this. And sure enough, they didn't. Maybe one of their friends installed the app, but they didn't. All right, so the result was Facebook changed how these apps work a bit, so that the apps could no longer silently gather data on the friends of the person who installed it. But there's something that I find I've like a little bit ironic here. I have a personal connection. This hearing was in 2018 about a whistleblower came forward in 2017 about the 2016 election. But actually, this flaw in the Facebook apps was known long before that. It was pointed out by a student who worked in my group, Adrienne Porter Felt, brilliant Berkeley PhD student. Before she came to Berkeley as an undergrad, one of her undergrad research projects was she got interested in how Facebook apps worked and privacy, and she discovered this, that if I install an app, it could download not only my data, but all of my friends. And she wrote a scientific paper that said, hey, this is a really bad idea. This is a big privacy risk just waiting to happen. And Facebook did nothing. That was in 2007. 10 years later, oops. After this showed up in the news, finally, the architecture got changed to reduce this risk. By the way, Adrienne is a brilliant computer scientist, now leads a team for browser security in the Google Chrome team. So out there protecting everyone who uses the internet. Why should you care about who has access to data that's visible on Facebook? Well, here was another research study that I thought was interesting. It showed that someone who's access to what things you've liked on Facebook can predict a fair bit about you. So for instance, Facebook knows what news articles you liked, what pages you liked, what groups you've liked. And these researchers showed that by using what you've liked, someone who knows your likes can predict with 95% accuracy whether you are black versus white, with 85% accuracy whether you're a Republican versus a Democrat. How do you think you do that, by the way? If you were going to take a look at someone's likes and predict whether they're Republican versus Democrat, why would their likes help you? Yeah, using classification, using machine learning. We're going to learn a little bit about machine learning. Any intuition? If they like certain politicians, sure. If someone likes AOC or Bernie Sanders, they're probably a Democrat. Politicians whose posts they like, okay, if they like a post from a politician. What else? Certain news outlets, yeah. If someone likes the San Francisco Chronicle or the New York Times, they're more likely to be Democrat. And if someone likes the Wall Street Journal, they're a bit more likely to be Republican. And maybe then if you look at particular articles they like a specific article, that gives additional information. See if they like posts from friends. Yeah. Maybe friends, if you can guess the political affiliation of their friends. Stances on particular topics. If they're liking articles on gun control, or are they liking articles on getting stricter on immigration? All right, so probably gives you some idea of how this might be plausible. Some other things that these researchers found you could infer about you from your likes. They could infer whether you were Christian or Muslim. If you were one of those two, they could infer which with 82% accuracy based on your likes. Why does this matter? Well, I thought it's interesting because this is probably something that most users are not directly entering into their Facebook profile, but it's something that Facebook could infer from other sources that Facebook has. But I also thought it was interesting because I don't know how many of you remember this, but I remember, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago. No, it must have been further back. After 9/11, concerns about terrorism, there were proposals, I think actually serious proposals, that we should build up a database of all Muslims in the US. Now that's really scary, right? Like, I mean, for me, my thought on that is, yikes. Your first reaction, if you're not a techie, is to think, yeah, sure, but where are you going to get that data from? I mean, that's never going to work. That's never going to fly. Like, you just don't, there's no government, no government records that have that information. So, not really, you can just kind of ignore this talk. It's never going to happen because it's just not technically feasible. But what I thought was interesting was this is suggesting that data that Facebook has and other commercial companies have about us as a result of just how we go about our life and use the internet might be enough to actually identify the many or most of the Muslims and enable building such a database, which is a really scary concept. And I think it's really relevant to know what is or isn't technologically feasible. And could identify sexual orientation, all sorts of information. So why is this interesting? I think this is interesting because it illustrates that it's not just what information you provide to Facebook or to companies deliberately disclose. It's not just like I typed in my birthday, so now they know my birthday. But it's also information that I didn't deliberately, explicitly disclose, yet they can deduce about me that might have privacy implications. Here's another case study. I'm doing Facebook again, but actually many of these things are not that specific to Facebook. And this is a really interesting piece of social science that was done out of their research group that I really liked. They did an experiment around an election. I think it was maybe the 2016 election. And they picked 61 million Facebook users in the US. And they randomly assigned half of them to a control group and half to the treatment group. And the control group on election day, they showed them a message on their Facebook wall that said, hey, it's election day, you should go vote. And then the other half, those in the treatment group, they showed them the same message, but then they also showed them some thumbnail pictures of friends of theirs who had voted, said, your friends, some of your friends have already voted, you should go vote. And what they found was that slight variation, just showing who your friends were, was enough to get 340,000 more people to vote. So I thought this was a fascinating experiment because it indicates ways that these social media companies could contribute to democracy, but also fascinating because from a privacy perspective, privacy advocates view this and they say, yikes, because this illustrates the potential for this technology, in this case, to be used for good, but in other cases, it could be used for really evil, malicious purposes. What it indicates is the influence that these sites can have over people's behavior, which risks creating an architecture of manipulation and influence that could be used for good or for ill. So for instance, knowing this, and if you were an evil mastermind and you were in control of Facebook, how might you try to influence an election to get your preferred politician to win? Okay, they could show you should vote plus thumbnails. If they show that to everyone, though, that's just going to boost turnout kind of for both parties, and it's not really going to change the outcome of the election, probably. It's just going to get more turnout. Yeah, Facebook, remember we just said that from your likes, Facebook probably has a pretty good idea of your political orientation. So now Facebook could start targeting these messages to only those people who are going to vote in a particular way. Or maybe not even Facebook, maybe some other entity could use targeted ads on Facebook to try to get more turnout from the people who are likely to vote for the politician they want to win. All right, so this is kind of a general concern that you'll see many privacy advocates have, is that the more information that is revealed about people, the more people lose their privacy, the easier it is to target certain populations for manipulating and influence, and that we may be creating these like architectures that could be used for bad purposes. I want to tell you one more case study. This one I think is fascinating. It's gets at the idea that we could protect our data by anonymizing it. Okay, so in the 1990s, medical researchers wanted to study medical data sets, to do data science on medical data sets, to try to identify risk factors for illness and maybe also treatments that might be particularly effective for particular illnesses. So they wanted to gather data from all the patients at all the hospitals and then do things like, let's compare those who got this treatment and those who didn't get the treatment and see how they turned out. Or let's see if there's some risk factors maybe in your family background that makes you more likely to have a heart attack. And for that, it's really useful to have a large amount of data to go look for patterns. And then we can go do, linear regression or statistical hypothesis tests or whatever. But the data in these medical records can be very sensitive. What's something sensitive that might be in someone's medical record? HIV, if they're HIV positive, any STDs, mental health, yeah, any mental health issues, family history. Yep. Might indicate that they had a past abortion, which maybe for some people is not something they want to make public. Insurance status, sure. Yeah, lots of possibilities. Okay, so doctors, to their credit, are very careful and concerned about patient confidentiality. They want to make sure that their patients feel comfortable coming to them and telling them everything, because they need to know to have the best chance of treating you. So the medical community decided this kind of research can be incredibly valuable, but we need to protect patient privacy. So what we're going to do is we're going to anonymize the records. They said, well, we can't completely remove all information about who the patient was, because it's really useful to know gender, for instance, like heart attacks may be a different pattern in males than in females. And it's important to know age, so we better keep the date of birth in there. And actually, there are a bunch of reasons why geographic location is really useful. For instance, if we want to find go check, is there some area that has a big hotspot for a particular kind of cancer? Maybe we need to go check out the water supply there. So they kept the zip codes there. So they moved the names, SSNs, account numbers from the medical records, but they kept zip codes, date of birth, and gender. And then released these anonymized records to medical researchers. Big deal, enables a lot of medical research. And Massachusetts Governor Weld promises the public, he says, your privacy is protected, so you don't have to worry about this. Along comes this PhD student from CMU, Latanya Sweeney, who's really interested in privacy and anonymity and these related issues. And she looks at this and she says, the date of birth has some information, narrows down who you are, and the zip code you live in narrows down how much you are. And if you look at the zip code, there's that's what, 100,000 possible zip codes, and date of birth, there's maybe I don't know, 30,000 possibilities there, and you multiply those two together and you get something like 300 million possibilities, and there's only 300 million Americans. And it sounds like there might be enough information in zip codes and date of birth and gender to uniquely identify many Americans. And so what she does, she writes this technical research paper that evaluates the privacy risk and says, you could probably re-identify many Massachusetts patients and map them to their medical records. But she doesn't stop there. She doesn't stop with this dry technical paper. She decides she has to put it in terms the public will understand. So she finds out Governor Weld's date of birth, the zip code where he lives. He's a male, and from that is able to uniquely identify his medical record in this public data set and emails this to the governor's office. Okay, highlighting that anonymization is not as easy as you might think. And this led to some major reforms in how the medical community treats this data. So it's not that easy to anonymize data. There may be other information in there that can be linked to you that allows, even if your name's been removed, allows re-identifying those records. So there's a couple of themes I want you to be familiar with about privacy. They were releasing the data to medical researchers. I don't know if they released it to the public. It's a good question. There's a couple of themes I want you to be aware of. We've kind of hinted at some of them. One way that that information about you could be revealed is you might disclose it. You might type it into Facebook. You might tell someone it. Another way is through collection. So for instance, when you visit a website, that website gathers information and says, oh, there's Joe again, and Joe is visiting these pages on the website. And the ad companies may have tracking information stuck in there that is putting a cookie on your computer and identifying you as you visit multiple websites, and the ad company is collecting information about what websites you visited. So that's collection. You haven't explicitly disclosed it. It was collected about you. And then finally, I think the third way that information about you could come to be known is inference. So from the information that was disclosed or collected, like which web pages you're visited, then the ad company might be able to build a profile and infer what your likely political orientation is, maybe a guess at your age, at your income, what your interests might be. That's inference. So each of these raises different privacy considerations. Disclosure, if you're explicitly disclosing, presumably you've made a decision about whether you want to disclose or not. So that's kind of the least privacy concerning. Collection, you might not be aware of, so that's a little bit more privacy concerning. You may not be consenting to it. And inference is the most concerning potentially, because not only might you be unaware of it, but many people, it's not obvious that one kind of information can be used to infer political orientation. It's very hard to reason about what inferences could be drawn. What is privacy? There's lots of different viewpoints about what this word privacy might mean. And historically, here's a few of them. The Supreme Court Justices Warren and Brandeis suggested that it's the right to be left alone, like that you won't have a solicitor knocking on your door and bothering you. Okay, so this is like right to be free from intrusion. Another view, maybe a more modern view of privacy that's maybe more relevant to us today, is it has to do with information. What kind of information about me is out there? And in particular, what control do I have over who can obtain or use information about me? Another view, a more compliance, bureaucratic, rule-oriented view, is fair information practices. These are practices that have been proposed by, for instance, the US government. And they have three key elements that can be useful to think about how a particular information system is or isn't protecting privacy. The first principle is notice, that people should have the chance to be aware of what information might be collected and how it might be used. Can anyone think of an example of notice on websites that you use? Yeah, that little banner that asks you to accept cookies is in some sense some kind of notice. Maybe it doesn't really tell you what the effect will be, but at least gives you an indication. Has anyone ever clicked on a privacy policy? Lots of web pages have privacy policies. My experience is very few people ever read them. It's very hard to understand them, but that would be an example of notice. The privacy policy might say, here's what data we collect, here's what we do with it. It has worked out very poorly in practice because it's this long, long thing of legalese that no one's ever going to read. Consent is the next potential principle here, which is seeking consent from people before collecting information about them, asking for their consent. And there's actually two varieties of people talk about. One kind is called opt-in. That you might find if you go to your doctor's office. Doctor's office will hand you a form saying, here's information we'd like to gather about you and what we'd like to do with it. Are you okay with that? Please sign this notice. Or before you have surgery, your doctor will say, here are the risks and here are the benefits. Do you want to do this? And then they're not going to do surgery unless you explicitly say, yes, I want you to do it. That'd be opt-in consent. Opt-out is this kind of funny thing that we could debate whether it's consent or not. The idea is that the business is going to collect information about you by default, but if you don't like it, you can tell them, hey, don't, and then they won't. And finally, is the third principle is access, that you should have a way to find out what information a business has collected about you. So for instance, you can get a free copy of your credit report to see what information the credit reporting agencies have about you and what they think is true about you. A last notion of privacy that I think is really interesting is called contextual integrity, which says, this is from philosopher Helen Nissenbaum, and she says, it's really about social norms and people's expectations. And privacy violations occur when data is used in a way that violates people's expectations given the context in which that like data was revealed. Okay, so like if I go down to the bar and I start talking to a buddy of mine and complaining about some situation in my life that I'm not happy about, there's kind of there's some context, there's implicit expectation that this is something that my buddies treat as confidential, not to distribute to the world. And if my buddy started telling everyone about this, I'd kind of be surprised and annoyed and unhappy. That would have been a privacy breach because there's a violation of a reasonable expectation that people in society have sort of developed. So that's when you can get into big trouble with privacy breaches, is when there's a violation of people's expectations. Yeah, so I've talked about informational privacy. Why is this relevant? I think it's particularly relevant. Maybe you can think about it relevant to you because of autonomy. In today's world, information kind of lives forever, but none of us are perfect. You're all college students. One of the things that we want to do for you is create an environment where you can try out ideas, debate ideas, maybe not ones you're fully committed to, and expose them to the test of critical thinking, and use that to figure out what you believe and what your values are and what positions you want to hold. And boy, when I was in college, like I, got in debates where I took positions that I'm glad no one today hears that I wouldn't stand behind because I'm just embarrassed at myself. So privacy can enable autonomy by enabling you the freedom to explore ideas that you're not really committed to, and you don't want 20 years from now someone to hold up in your face and to be forever pilloried for holding some ridiculous view. Privacy can also enable like reputation management, helping people with social boundaries, can be a limit on government power. It can support freedom of thought and speech. It can give people an opportunity for second chances if they screwed up, so that there's not a permanent record indicating their screw up. Yeah, we all need the right to make mistakes. None of us perfect. Need the right to make mistakes without having them ruin our lives. Well said. Thank you. The trend, the reason why I think this is particularly relevant to your generation is because the trend is technology is getting cheaper. And there's many kinds of technology that can be used to gather data about you that allows more data collection at lower cost. Drones, devices in your home, cameras, getting cheaper and cheaper. And it's going to be tempting to use them. So I want to talk you through an example of automated license plate readers. And this is technology that's getting to be used. And I'm going to show you a data set from Oakland that was piloting this 6-7 years ago. Today, many jurisdictions are using automated license plate readers. And how this might look is there's a camera mounted on the police car. And as the police car is driving down, this camera is just capturing pictures all the time. And there's some software there that anytime a car is in view, that analyzes that picture to find the license plate and read the license plate number and add to a database the license plate number, the GPS location where it was seen in the time. Okay. Why might this be useful to police? What would be the potential benefits of this technology? Tracking. Yeah, why is that useful? To catch criminals. Yep. Yeah, evidence in a criminal case. Track a suspect's location. Lost cars. Absolutely. So here's an example from the local Berkeley Piedmont area. Where police caught someone who was engaged in armed theft and stole cars. And in Piedmont, they had automated license plate readers. They had a surveillance video camera seeing this particular car, this Acura, being stolen, and then they saw the license plate number on it. And then Piedmont had automated license plate readers throughout the area, and they were able to go back retrospectively in that database and find all the places where that license plate was seen, and track where that car had been, and use that to track down the suspect, and eventually caught the criminal. So you can imagine why police would be very interested in this. It could be very useful for investigations, but it's also raised concerns from privacy advocates because of the risks of automated license plate readers. For instance, here's some news articles you see that you can look at some of the concerns that have been reported about them, that they're used at protests to capture the license plates of cars that are near the protests and potentially track down protesters. That minorities are disproportionately affected by this surveillance. That one study was finding that surveillance disproportionately monitoring blacks more than whites. The ACLU recommends in their advice to protesters, don't drive to a protest, walk or take a bicycle so you aren't identified by your license plate. The Associated Press reported in 2011, after 9/11, that automated license plate readers were being used to gather data on cars often seen around mosques to try to identify Muslims and build up a database of Muslims. So some very real privacy risks here. What I want to do is I want to work with a data set. About 6 or 7 years ago, the city of Oakland tried a trial with automated license plate reading, and they deployed it on a trial basis in a bunch of their police cars. And I want to show you now, if I can, some data set from that pilot. Having some technical issues here. Give me a moment. Okay, here is our notebook. I hope you can see this. This is, they released the data set from this pilot under a privacy activist requested it under an Open Records Act request. And so I've got the data set from their pilot. And what you can see in this data set here is one is a table, a giant table with one row per license plate read. So you can see the first column has the license plate, the next column has a timestamp, and then the final column has a GPS location. 2 million, over 2 million data points in this data set. Well, I thought we'd go take a look at what you can learn about someone from this data set. Now, you could probably guess what the first thing that I did was. What's the first thing I looked for in this data set? I looked for my license plate. But it turns out, I guess I hadn't spent much time in Oakland, or for whatever reason, my car wasn't in the data set. So I can't show you my car. So I started thinking, who could we look for? And I decided I would look for the mayor of Oakland at the time, a woman by the name of Jing Quan. Now, to figure out where she had been seen in this data set, I first had to figure out her license plate number for her car. But it turns out that if you do a search for Jing Quan, you will turn up the following news article, which is loading. Jing Quan, Oakland's new mayor, gets car booted for not paying parking tickets. And does anyone see what I see in this picture? There's a license plate number. That's her car and her license plate for her official city vehicle. So let's go look for that license plate in the data set. And we know how to do this. This is a where clause. Does she know? Probably not. Okay, it's searching through 2 million records. We're waiting for it to show up. And I'll just let you know the short version is her record shows up 6 times in this data set. And it gives some GPS coordinates. And I wanted to figure out, what did that mean? I don't know how to interpret GPS coordinates. So I decided I better do a visualization. So I decided I was going to convert these GPS coordinates on a map. So to do that, I had to do some data cleaning here. We have mapping functionality in our data science library, but they expect the latitude and the longitude to be separate. And here they're together in one column. So I had to do a little bit of data modification to separate these out into a separate latitude and longitude. And I won't go into that for time reasons. This is really common when you're working with data sets. Often the data isn't exactly in the format you need, and you have to convert the format. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new table where I split out this GPS into a separate latitude and longitude column. And then when I do that, we can go search this data set for Jing Quan's car, pull out the latitude and longitude and map that on a map of Oakland. And my computer is crunching. It's going to take a really long time because this is 2 million records and it's working through each one at a time. But when it finishes, we should be able to see where Jing Quan's car was observed. Here's a map. All right, so we can see each one of these blue markers is a place where her car was seen. So there's lots of them down here. Does anyone know what's down here in Oakland? Around this area? That's City Hall. If anyone's had jury duty, you may know there's the courts down there. There's the police station down there. Why do you think her car was seen so often near here? She probably works there, so she spends a lot of time there. So her car is parked there a lot. So it has a high chance of getting seen by the police cars. Someone else pointed out the police cars, the police station is right near here. So the police cars probably spend a lot of time there for sure. Every day they leave and they go back. So they have a high chance if you park near there of being recorded. Yeah, maybe she's paying her parking tickets to get the boot removed. Okay, and there's another location up here, and I didn't know what that was. I had to look it up, and it turns out there's some more city offices up there. So I think what we're probably seeing is her car parked around work locations. So I thought that was interesting, and I thought I would poke around a little bit more and color code these with these markers so that we could see which ones were seen during the weekend, which ones were seen during weekday daytime, and which ones are seen during weekday evening. And this time I started looking at the cars of some other city officials, and I decided to look at the City of Oakland's fire chief, who also has a government issued car. And so I found out the license plate of the fire chief's car. And I'm gonna, when this crunch finishes, it's gonna show you the locations in the map where the fire chief's car was observed. Why do you think that I wanted to color code to indicate weekend versus weekday daytime versus weekday evening? How is that information relevant? You can find out where they live, know where they work. Yeah, weekday daytime locations likely to be related to where they work. How do you find out where they live? Yeah, if it's where it's parked in the evenings, that's a good chance that that's where they live. If you see the car on a weekend daytime, maybe that's where they like to, recreation or do for fun. Okay, so the time of day conveys some information as well. So here are the matches for the fire chief's car. And you can see this is kind of a range of different locations. So let's try looking at some of these locations. All right, this is blue. So I think these blue ones are weekday, daytime. Any thoughts about what this might represent here? Yeah, I think this is the fire department's like headquarters or something like that. So probably this is her at like, city offices. There were a few more up here. And if I remember right, I think these were seen at like 5 or 6 p.m. on a weekday evening. Any ideas what that might represent? Maybe could be going home, could be dinner at a restaurant. Yeah, I don't know. Hard to say. Maybe dinner with friends. Yeah. And then there were some more over here. My color coding seems like it's not working, but these were, this was seen at like, I think midnight on maybe it was a weekday or a weekend. So late at night. So what do you think this indicates? Home address. Does anyone notice? As I start zooming in, I can see really quite accurately, roughly the home address. I don't know exactly which one of these is, but it's probably one of these, 2 or 3 houses. And in fact, I can go on Google Street View and I can enter in that GPS location and look around and see what the neighborhood looks like. So I think I probably just learned where the fire chief lives. So let's look at some others. I started looking at some other people's. And I started looking for other people whose license plates showed up a lot. So this time I want to show you one more. Here's one that showed up a whole lot, like a whole lot. I don't know what that is. Maybe that was like an Uber driver or something like that. They're all over the place. But one of the things you can see is that if you zoom in, you can see there's a lot. There's a lot at one location. Down here. And I think I just learned where they live. Because look at all those reads down there. I think they're probably parking near their home. Here's one more. One more. I wanted to look at one more. What do you see down here? Here's another person. I think we probably figured out where they live. As we zoom in here, we can see, oh, it looks like they live somewhere around International and 16th or so. Look at all these reads over here. These, my color coding isn't working right, but these were like evening and weekend times, probably parked down there. And then we can see another cluster over here. Does anyone know where this is? Does anyone who knows Oakland know what area this is around here? This is around Laney College. Laney College is right around here. And if you know something about Laney College, you know that right around here are a bunch of like dorms and apartments that tend to have Laney College students living in them. And here you can't see the times, but these times we're seeing at like 11:59, 3 a.m. in the morning. So I think what we're seeing here is this is not their home, but this is spending overnight some other location occasionally. So what do you think that is? Yikes. Obvious candidate would be maybe they're spending the night at a boyfriend or girlfriend's apartment. So this is the point when I got completely creeped out by the analysis I'm doing. Not only am I discovering something about where these people live, but I'm discovering stuff about their life that I really don't think that I should be looking at. So I wanted to show you this case study as a worked example of how data that might seem somewhat innocuous, and even in this case has been anonymized in some sense, can still reveal an awful lot about our personal lives. And I hope that in your future career in data scientists, you think about the privacy implications of the data sets that you are in charge of, and that you act as a good steward and to protect people's privacy interests and respect them as people. Thanks so much for coming to today's lecture.